There comes a point where you've said everything you know how to say, you've asked, repeated, waited, and now it's just quiet. And the hardest part isn't even the silence, it's not knowing how to pray anymore. I want to sit with you in that moment and look at what Scripture actually says about it. This is for you if prayer used to feel clear, and now it just feels empty. You're not avoiding God, you're not drifting on purpose, you're just out of words. And there's something heavy about that, because no one really tells you what to do when you've already prayed honestly, and nothing has changed. So now every time you try again, it feels thinner, more uncertain, like you're repeating something that no longer holds weight. And Scripture doesn't ask you to pretend that's not happening. Number 1, Psalm 13, when prayer turns into a question you can't resolve. David doesn't start with calm faith. He says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" That's not poetic exaggeration. That's what it sounds like when someone realizes the silence isn't short-term. And notice what he's not doing. He's not choosing better words. He's not correcting his tone. He's not trying to sound faithful. He's asking the same question 4 times in 2 verses. How long? How long? How long? How long? That repetition matters. Because it shows something most people skip. When prayer feels like it's not working, Scripture doesn't rush you past that moment. It lets the question stay. It lets you say it again and again. Not because God needs repetition, but because sometimes you don't have anything else left to say. Number 2, Romans 8:26. When you don't have words, that's already known. This is the part most people quote quickly. The Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. That line is more honest than we usually let it be. We don't know what to pray, not occasionally, not just in confusing moments, but in the exact place you're in right now. And Scripture doesn't treat that like failure. It calls it weakness, which means it expects it. And then it says something even quieter. The Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Not polished prayers, not structured sentences, groanings. Which means the moment where you feel like you've lost your ability to pray isn't a gap in communication. It's a different kind of prayer entirely, one that doesn't rely on you holding it together. Number 3, Lamentations 3, when it feels like God isn't even listening. This passage is uncomfortable if you read it slowly. I cry out for help, but He shuts out my prayer. That's in Scripture, not hidden, not softened, written plainly. Because there are moments where it doesn't just feel like silence, it feels like your prayer isn't getting through at all. And the Bible doesn't correct that feeling immediately, it lets it be said. But then, without changing the situation, something shifts in the middle of the chapter. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope, not because anything improved, not because the silence ended, but because something about God remained true even while the experience didn't. That's a different kind of stability. Not based on response, but based on who God is when there is no response. Number 4, Luke 18. When you keep praying without knowing why. Jesus tells a story about a widow who keeps coming back with the same request, over and over. No new angle, no refined language, just persistence. And what's easy to miss is this. The story doesn't say she felt confident, it doesn't say she felt heard, it doesn't say she had peace, it just shows her returning, again and again. Because sometimes continuing to pray doesn't come from clarity. It comes from having nowhere else to go. And Jesus doesn't criticize that, He points to it. There's a kind of moment no one prepares you for, where you realize God hasn't answered, and you don't know what else to say. Not because you've given up, but because you've already said everything honestly. And what Scripture shows is this: that moment isn't the end of prayer. It's the point where prayer stops sounding like language and starts sounding like need, where questions repeat, where words run out, where silence stretches, and somehow none of that disqualifies you. If anything, Scripture places you right inside the kind of prayers it already recorded. If this is where you are, you don't need to force something more articulate. You don't need to rebuild the words. You're not behind. You're not doing this wrong. You're in a place the Bible already speaks about, plainly, without rushing you out of it. So if there's anything to carry with you, it's this: the absence of words doesn't mean the absence of prayer. And the silence you're sitting in is not unfamiliar to God, even if it still feels that way.